I want to go to the team that's arguing to abolish the death penalty and point out that to some degree what your opponents are saying is that the policy is not perfect but could be perfected. The things that you're talking about could be fixed. And given that hypothetical, if the problems that you specified with the death penalty were fixed, would that change your position on the justice of the death penalty? Diane Russ-Tierney.
I'll go first. I mean, I think that the real question is whether it can be fixed. I mean, we've been at this for over 40 years. The court has looked at this, and what we've seen is as the justices have looked at this case, one by one, they're coming to say, this isn't going to work. So I don't believe it can be fixed. It is something that seems to be beyond us to get the racism out, to get the mistake out. We've been trying this, and so the question really is, do we continue to do this?
But to my question, if it could be fixed, and I take your point that you don't think it could be, would that change your opinion? I just want to sort of see where the moral parameters are.
Well, I think the moral ground is that this is not necessary for the government to do. And I think the burden is really on the proponents of this policy to say that it does something that is of value, and we haven't heard that.
Well, you're missing a point here when you ask a loaded question like that, if it could be perfected.
Well, no, it's your opponent's argument is that...
my proponent's argument is that it should be effective, swift, and sure, right?
Right, and your argument was, here's what's wrong with it, this is wrong with it, this was wrong with it. So I think it's quite logical to say if those wrongs could be addressed, what does that leave for you?
It's an impossible hypothetical. I'm a law professor. I hate to fight the hypothetical, but
okay. So why is it impossible?
If you're making a public policy argument and you're living, just as the Attorney General in Virginia said, in a fairyland where you actually believe that you're going to eliminate the risk of executing innocent people, which you didn't mention, John, as a major cost of the death penalty, which we now know is much greater than we ever did before. Not just because of DNA testing. The DNA testing obviously has proven that, but in 2009, the National Academy of Sciences has just indicated in a groundbreaking report that fingerprints, ballistics, bite mark evidence, pattern evidence, all kinds of other evidence that we used to rely on and think we're so sure are in doubt, and we're now trying to get all these resources together to do basic and applied research and make it reliable.
Let me bring then to Robert Blecker, your opponent's point now, that in fact it could not be fixed on this particular point, that we could never get to 100% certainty that an innocent person would never be executed. Do you think that's true? And if so, does that concern you seriously?
Well, of course I'm concerned about executing an innocent person. Every retributivist would find that the ultimate horror, and I just want to express my respect for what Barry Scheck does with the Innocence Project. That is fundamentally a retributive program. We don't want the innocent being executed. You say 100% certainty. I'm not 100% certain that this ceiling won't fall, collapse, and kill us. Neither are we all, but we're very brave to sit here. The fact is we trust our lives constantly. We trust our lives for a tiny risk of death, and for the sake, when I walk my beloved grandchildren and do it down Broadway where a truck might jump the curb and kill them for the sake of convenience. Surely if I'm willing to take an infinitesimal risk of those I love for the sake of convenience, I'm willing to take that same kind of risk for those I detest for the sake of something much more sacred, which is justice. It can be refined. I'd love to talk about how it can be refined and improved. And one last point, if I might, which is they duck the question, and the reason they duck the question is because abolitionists are, your question, because abolitionists are divided into two categories. Some will admit, and have admitted to me, yes, people do deserve to die, I just don't trust the government to do it. Others deny that anybody can deserve to die, and so when you ask the question you ask, you're using the entering wedge to split the ranks of the abolitionists.
I'll admit I don't trust the government to get it right.
But do people deserve to die, Barry?
It's a government program.
Do people deserve to die?
Diane.
Yeah, I want to bring this back to what this is really a conversation about, which is a public policy question. It is not an abstract conversation about whether some people deserve to die, and I think that's the point. We've been proceeding down this road as if that's the question. The question is, do we do things that don't add up to a real product? And we've yet to hear. We've heard, it's both sides of the story about deterrence.
But Diane, why don't you feel the abstract question is relevant?
Because we're talking about a public policy like everything else. And when you have a public policy decision to make, you look at, does this thing that we're doing actually produce what it's supposed to? Does it work in a way that it's supposed to work? And our opponents concede that the thing is broken. They just say we need to keep trying to fix it. The point is, it's broken.
Ken Scheidegger, just a little bit more on the abstractness of this issue.
Okay.
Your opponent is saying that the abstractions are irrelevant to this conversation. For example, the question that maybe some people do deserve to die does not belong in this conversation because we're talking about a policy. What's your response to that?
I believe that both the retributive and the utilitarian aspects have to be considered. I think that Robert is right, that it is a matter of justice and a matter of who deserves to die. And I also think that the practical aspects also need to be considered, the questions of deterrence and incapacitation. And I think we need to weigh all three of these factors when we consider the public policy such as this.
I should add one thing on the, I don't want to be perceived as ducking the moral question. I think that there are plenty of people in this country that are pro-life, that believe that it is wrong to take a life. The Pope, I'm in the corner with the Pope and others on that question. But when you're debating a public policy issue about something like this that doesn't work and is causing incredible suffering for the wrongly convicted, even for many families of murder victims that don't find closure in this process and go through it, some do. I just, nobody wants to say that the moral question is irrelevant, but it is a factor to be weighed, that's all. And there are plenty of people on the right that think it's morally wrong to take a life.
I just find it a little bit difficult to disentangle from the policy question, for example, in the question I'm going to put to you, Robert Blecker, where I think I heard you say that if society makes some mistakes and some innocent people do die on rare occasions, as much as you abhor that, that's a price that we need to be willing to pay in order to preserve the right to execute. Am I hearing you correctly, that you're willing to pay that price of mistakes being made?
In order to preserve the responsibility for justice, but then the question is, what is that probability? What is that threshold?
But let's say it's 1 in a million. Let's say it's 1 in a billion.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, we consciously allocate resources in this society. We could make our bridges safer, we could make our roads safer, and we don't. We can statistically calculate how many people will die on the highways that otherwise wouldn't die if we made them safer. We choose to let them die because we think we have other priorities. My point is that justice, which is the second purpose listed in the preamble of the United States Constitution, along with a more perfect union and general welfare and common defense, et cetera, is a fundamental value that we embrace in this society and that we need to, unfortunately, take some very small risks, but I would minimize them, and I do have practical practical suggestions for refining the death penalty.
Let me bring Diane
I was
back
going to
in.
say, we're talking as if the only thing out there is the death penalty. The vast majority of homicides do not result in a death sentence. The vast majority of cases that are resolved have justice because people are serving long prison sentences, including life without parole. So the idea that unless we have the death penalty, we cannot have justice is just a false premise.
Ken Scheidegger?
For the vast majority of homicides, yes, life in prison is justice. But for a very few, for the worst of the worst, no, it isn't. It's not for the marathon bomber. It wasn't for Charles Manson. He's grinning at us to this day because we temporarily abolished the death penalty, networking with his fan base on his smuggled cell phone. And he just has not been sufficiently punished and will not be sufficiently punished.
Barry Scheck.
Well, first of all, I think Bob ducked your question about how many innocents, what is the error rate for executing the wrongly convicted that would be tolerable in the cost-benefit analysis. And I know that you'd want to see the system perfected, but when you have really good analysis by Sam Gross in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences pointing out that we have a 4.1% error rate in capital cases in the United States, I'd submit to you that's really an unacceptable number.
That would be 4,000 in a million.
But it's actually a number that's not characterized correctly, but we would be getting into a very complex statistical debate over that, and that the audience would be uninterested in, and I'm probably not qualified to.
Well, it's not even a question. You don't even have to characterize
There's
it.
no
Let's just
4% error
let's
rate,
just
Barry,
say,
you know it.
John asked you if it's 1 in a million. What if it's 1 in 400? What if it's 1 in 1,000? I mean, let's get to numbers that, frankly, are pretty close to that error rate. I mean, we're not even getting into there's over 1,500 people whose convictions in this country since 1989 were vacated based on new evidence of innocence. And you may say, oh, that's true. The Registry of Wrongful Convictions says that. And maybe Kent will say, well, not all of them were innocent. Maybe some of them just got unfair trials or something like that. But these numbers are substantial. The 326 post-conviction DNA exonerations, they're all innocent.